It was a quiet night, the kind that feels almost too ordinary to remember. In a small Soviet town, people were finishing their dinners, turning off their lights, settling into sleep. Windows glowed softly in the darkness. Somewhere a kettle whistled. Somewhere else a radio hummed an old tune. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt wrong. But just beyond the edge of that peaceful town, something was happening. Something no one could see, something no one could smell, something that would change everything. Inside a nuclear power plant, a routine test was underway. The kind of test that had been done before, the kind that should have ended quietly, unnoticed. But this time, it didn't. In a single moment, the calm of that night was shattered. A flash of light, a tremor in the ground, and then silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that comes right before the world realizes something has gone terribly wrong. The people of this town didn't know it yet. They couldn't see the danger drifting through the air. They couldn't feel what had already begun. But history would remember this night. As the moment, everything changed. That night would change everything. But just hours earlier, life in Pripyat felt ordinary. It was the kind of place built on promise. A young city filled with families, workers, and children who believed they were part of something important. Just a few miles away stood the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a symbol of progress, of pride, of a future powered by science. For the people who lived here, it wasn't something to fear. It was something to trust. In the early morning, buses carried workers to their shifts. Men in uniforms, lunch packed neatly, stepping into another day that felt no different from the last. They joked, they talked, they made plans for the weekend. Back in the city, mothers walked their children to school. Old men sat on benches watching the world pass by. Radios played softly in open windows. The rhythm of daily life moved slowly, predictably, comfortably. There was a calm to it all. A quiet confidence that tomorrow would look just like today. Even as night approached again, nothing seemed out of place. Lights flickered on across apartment blocks. Families gathered for dinner. Laughter echoed faintly through thin walls. No one was rushing. No one was worried. Because nothing had ever gone wrong before. And when you live in a place where everything feels stable, you stop questioning it. You stop imagining that anything could break. But beneath that calm surface, something fragile was already beginning to crack. The systems people trusted, the routines they depended on, the silence they believed meant safety. All of it was about to be tested. And the people of this quiet town had no idea how quickly their world was about to disappear. The people of that quiet town believed nothing would change. But in the early hours of April 26, 1986, everything did. Inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, the night shift had already begun. It was supposed to be routine, a test, nothing more. The kind of procedure that had been planned, discussed, and scheduled like any other. The men working that night weren't expecting danger. They were tired, focused, moving through familiar steps in a place they knew well. Panels of switches, rows of blinking lights, the steady hum of machinery that had always been there. At first, Nothing seemed unusual. But slowly, things began to drift off course. A reading didn't look right. A response came too slowly. A system behaved in a way no one expected. Small details, easy to dismiss. And in a place built on routine, hesitation can be dangerous. So they continued, adjusting controls, following procedure, trying to bring everything back into balance. But something deeper was already slipping out of control. Inside reactor number 4, pressure was building. Not visibly, not dramatically, but steadily, silently. Then, in a matter of seconds, everything escalated. A surge of power. A sudden spike no one could fully contain. The reactor became unstable, faster than anyone could react. And then, a violent explosion tore through the core. Not just one, but 2 blasts in rapid succession. The force lifted a massive concrete lid weighing hundreds of tons and shattered it like it was nothing. The roof was ripped open. Debris shot into the night sky. And for the first time, the reactor was exposed. Flames didn't behave the way people expected. This wasn't an ordinary fire. It burned with an unnatural glow, blue, almost beautiful, and completely deadly. Pieces of radioactive material scattered across the ground, across the building, across the air itself. But no one standing there truly understood what they were seeing. To them, it looked like a fire. Something to contain, something to fight. Not something already beyond control. Back in Pripyat, the night was briefly interrupted. Some residents woke to a distant sound. A dull thud. A strange light on the horizon. But the city did not panic. There were no alarms, no warnings, no immediate sense of disaster. People stepped onto their balconies, curious. They looked toward the plant, watching the glow in the distance. Some even thought it was beautiful. They didn't know what had just happened. They didn't know that the air itself had changed. That invisible particles were already drifting through the streets, settling on buildings, on trees, on skin. The explosion lasted only moments, but its consequences had already begun. And nothing, no decision, no action could undo what had been set in motion that night. The explosion was over in seconds, but what it released would linger far longer. Back in Pripyat, the night slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The glow in the distance still hung over the horizon, strange and almost hypnotic. Some people stayed awake, watching. Others simply went back to bed. Because nothing felt urgent. Nothing smelled different. Nothing looked dangerous. And that was the most dangerous part of all. What drifted from the broken reactor inside the Chernobyl nuclear power plant wasn't something you could see, like smoke, or hear, like an alarm. It moved silently through the air. Invisible particles, carried by the wind, settling on rooftops, streets, trees, and people. Children slept with their windows open. Families breathed it in without knowing. Some stepped outside, drawn by curiosity, staring at the distant light as fine dust settled gently around them. It didn't burn, it didn't sting, It didn't warn. Radiation doesn't announce itself. There's no sound when it touches you, no signal when it enters your body. It simply is there. And by the time anyone realizes it, it's already too late to avoid it. In those first hours, confusion spread faster than fear. Workers returned home. Parents prepared breakfast. Buses began their routes as usual. Life tried to continue. But something had already changed. The air itself was no longer safe. Yet no one had told them. No alarms echoed through the city. No urgent voices broke the silence. Just the quiet hum of a normal morning, hiding something deeply unnatural. It's easy to fear what we can see. But that night, and the morning that followed, proved something far more unsettling. The most dangerous threats are the ones that feel like nothing at all. The danger couldn't be seen. And that meant the men who were sent in to face it didn't know what they were walking into. In the early hours after the explosion, the first calls went out. A fire at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Flames on the roof, smoke rising into the night. To the firefighters, it sounded like any other emergency. They arrived quickly, sirens cutting through the quiet roads, boots hitting the ground, hoses uncoiled with practiced speed. These were men trained to act, not to hesitate. They looked up and saw the fire. But it didn't look like anything they had fought before. It was a strange glow, blue, almost shimmering. Pieces of debris lay scattered across the ground, still warm, still burning. Some of the men picked them up, not knowing what they were holding. No protective suits, no special equipment, no warning. They climbed onto the roof. Step by step, they moved closer to the source, doing what they had always done, putting out flames, containing what they believed was just another fire. But this wasn't a fire they could fight. With every second they stayed, the invisible danger wrapped itself around them. Radiation doesn't shout. It doesn't push you back. It doesn't tell you to run. It simply takes hold, quietly. Some of the men began to feel it almost immediately. A strange metallic taste, a sudden wave of nausea, a heat that didn't feel like fire, but something deeper, something wrong. Still, they kept going, because that's what they were trained to do. They didn't see themselves as heroes. They were just doing their job. By the time the first light of morning touched the sky, many of them had already received doses that would change their lives forever. They had faced something no one had prepared them for, and they faced it without knowing. In a disaster filled with confusion and silence, their actions stood out. Not because they understood the danger, but because they chose to act anyway. While the firefighters were still battling a danger they couldn't see, the city nearby was only beginning to understand that something was wrong. By the morning after the explosion, life in Pripyat had not stopped, but it had changed. People whispered. Some noticed a strange taste in the air. Others spoke about the glow they had seen during the night. Parents looked at their children a little more closely. Neighbors exchanged quiet, uncertain questions. But still, there were no clear answers. No urgency, no instructions. Hours passed. And then, finally, the announcement came. Buses were arriving. the city would be evacuated. Not permanently, at least that's what they were told. Just for a few days. That's what people believed. So they packed lightly. A change of clothes, some documents, maybe a photograph or two. Children carried their favorite toys, not knowing they would never bring them back. There was no panic in the streets, only confusion. Lines formed as buses rolled in, one after another, stretching farther than the eye could see. The sound of engines filled the air, mixing with quiet conversations and the shuffling of footsteps. Families stayed close together. Some people turned back one last time, looking at their homes, their windows, the lives they had built. Everything was still there. Nothing looked broken. That made it harder to leave. Doors were closed, lights were turned off, keys were left behind. And slowly, the city began to empty. Thousands of people moving away at once, yet the silence somehow grew louder. Within hours, Pripyat was no longer a living city. It became something else. A place paused in time. Meals left unfinished. Toys left on the floor. Voices gone. They thought they would return, but they never did. And what they left behind would remain untouched for decades. They thought they would come back. They never did. After the evacuation, Pripyat didn't just fall silent. It was frozen in time. Days turned into weeks, weeks into years. Homes remained exactly as they were left behind. Plates still on tables, coats still hanging by the door, toys waiting in empty rooms for children who would never return. At first, the focus was on control. The fire had to be contained. The reactor had to be buried. Thousands of workers, many of them ordinary men, were sent in to clean up what they could. They were later called liquidators. They cleared debris, they shoveled radioactive material, they worked in short shifts, knowing time itself had become dangerous. Some wore protective gear. Many did not have enough. Each step they took came with a cost. Above the destroyed reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, a massive concrete structure was built, a hurried attempt to seal what could no longer be undone. It wasn't perfect, but it was necessary. Beyond the plant, the land itself began to change. Forests absorbed what the wind had carried. Rivers moved it silently across distances. Animals wandered through areas humans could no longer safely enter. And the effects didn't stay in one place. They traveled. Across borders, across countries, across time. For many families, the aftermath wasn't something they saw right away. It came later. In quiet hospital rooms. In long-term illnesses. In questions that didn't have simple answers. There was no single moment when it all ended. Because it never truly did. Chernobyl wasn't just a disaster of one night. It became a lasting presence. A reminder of how quickly things can change. And how long the consequences can remain. Even now, decades later, the silence of that abandoned city still speaks. Not loudly, but clearly enough for those willing to listen. Even now, the story doesn't really feel like it's over. Because what happened after that night, what followed in the years after, never truly faded. The empty streets of Pripyat still stand as they were left, silent, unchanged, a place where time seems to have stopped, but memory hasn't. Chernobyl is often remembered for the explosion, but it's not just the moment that matters. It's the people, the ones who lived ordinary lives until they didn't, the ones who stepped forward without knowing the cost, and the ones who left everything behind, believing they would return. What remains isn't just a place. It's a reminder that even in the most controlled systems, something can go wrong, that not all dangers announce themselves, and that some consequences echo far beyond the moment they begin. History doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And if you listen closely, you can still hear it. In the silence of a city that never came back,